There's a specific kind of silence that happens right after someone asks you, "How are you?" Not the silence of not knowing the answer, the silence of knowing it too well and choosing, again, to say fine. You carry entire conversations inside you, entiers arguments, entire confessions, entire versions of yourself that never made it out. You've rehearsed words you never said. You've imagined moments that never happened. You've processed, filtered, translated, and then swallowed. And the strange part is you do this every day, without noticing, without naming it, as if the inner life you live is somehow less real than the one visible to others. If any part of this feels familiar to you, you're not alone. And if you ever feel like sharing your experience, the comments are open. You rehearse conversations in your head, but in the real world you remain silent. There's a conversation you've had 100 times already. You know exactly how it starts. You know what you'd say. You've chosen the words carefully, not too sharp, not too soft. In your mind, it always lands the way it should, but when the moment arrives, something shifts. The air changes, the other person looks at you, and all those rehearsed words dissolve into something vague, something manageable, something that keeps the peace. So you say almost nothing, and later, alone, you run the conversation again, this time with what you should have said. The version where you were clear, where you were heard, where the silence didn't win. There's something quietly exhausting about living between the person you are in your own mind and the one who shows up when the room fills with other people, as if those two figures never fully agree on what to say next. You imagine you're being watched, but you act as if no one is looking. There's a version of you that walks into a room and is noticed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just seen. The way you sometimes see a person and think there's something about them. You've imagined that moment more than once. The way it would feel to be looked at and recognized, not for what you do, but for what you are, quietly, without having to explain yourself. But when you actually enter the room, you shrink, you find the edge, you make yourself smaller, you act as though the fantasy never existed, as if wanting to be seen was somehow embarrassing. And so you live in that gap, longing for visibility with one hand, pulling the curtain closed with the other, not sure which one you trust more. You observe yourself from the outside like an extra in your own life. Sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary moment, you step outside yourself and watch. You see yourself sitting at the table, holding the cup, nodding along, and something in you wonders who that person is. It's not confusion. It's more like distance, a quiet separation between the one living the moment and the one observing it from somewhere slightly above, slightly behind, slightly removed. You notice the gestures you make when nervous, the way you laugh a half second after everyone else, the expression you wear when you're pretending to be fine. You've learned to recognize it from the outside. There's a strange loneliness in being your own witness, watching yourself move through days that feel both completely yours and somehow not quite. You revisit old interactions trying to find where they went. You remember a conversation from 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 years. The exact words, the pause before the answer, the way the other person's expression shifted in a direction you still can't fully read. You go back there sometimes, not to punish yourself, more like an investigator returning to a scene, looking for the detail you missed, the moment things quietly changed. You replay IT asked our word here, or tone there. Try to locate the precise second where something between you and another person began to close instead of open. The mind does this not out of obsession, but out of a deep need to understand, to make sense of the invisible distance that sometimes grows between people without a single explanation. You talk to yourself more than you talk to anyone else. There's a voice that runs almost constantly, not loud, not dramatic, more like a low current beneath everything, commenting, questioning, remembering, revising. You talk yourself through the morning. You narrate decisions as you make them. You argue both sides of things no one else knows you're considering. You comfort yourself in language no one else hears. It's the longest relationship you've ever had, the most honest one, in many ways. The one where nothing gets filtered before it's said, where the real version of events gets to exist. And yet, it's entirely private. A whole interior life, fluent and complex, that the world outside never quite gets access to. You feel your story isn't interesting, so you don't even start telling it. Someone asks about you and something hesitates. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've already imagined their reaction, the polite nod, the eyes that drift, the subject that changes. So you summarize. You compress entire chapters into something brief and manageable. You make yourself easier to process. You leave out the parts that actually matter. It's not dishonesty. It's a kind of protection, learned quietly over time, from moments when you opened slightly and the room didn't shift the way you hoped. So the real story stays inside, whole and unedited and waiting for a listener you're not entirely sure exists yet. You create better versions of yourself, but you never present them to the world. Somewhere in you lives a version that speaks without hesitating, that says the true thing at the right moment, that moves through the world with a kind of quiet certainty you've always recognized but rarely inhabited. You know this version well. You've built it carefully, detail by detail, in the space between who you are and who you sense you could be. But presenting it feels like a risk too specific to name. Not fear of failure exactly, more like fear of being seen trying. And so the better version waits, patient, fully formed, living just one decision away from the world that never quite invited it in. You translate emotions into thoughts, but never into words. You feel something, and immediately the mind moves in, starts organizing, labeling, building structure around something that was, for just a moment, raw and unmediated. By the time you could speak it, it's already been translated, processed into something safer, something that fits inside a sentence. But sentences don't always carry what the feeling actually was. Something gets lost in the conversion, a weight, a texture, a truth that language approximates but never holds. So you carry emotions as thoughts and thoughts as silence. And somewhere beneath all that structure, the original feeling waits, unnamed. You hope to be noticed without making any noise. You don't ask for it directly. That's not how it works inside you. It's more like a quiet signal you send out and wait patiently to see if anyone receives. You do the thing well and watch the room. You say something true and leave a pause. You show up consistently in small ways and register every time it goes unremarked. There's a particular kind of disappointment that doesn't announce itself. It just settles slowly, like dust on something you stopped moving. And still you keep the signal quiet because asking directly feels like changing the rules of a game you've been playing for a very long time. You become so accustomed to the invisible that it becomes your identity. At some point, invisibility stopped feeling like a condition. It started feeling like a description, not something that happened to you, something that became you. You stopped noticing the moments you erased yourself. The habit ran so deep it disappeared into instinct to take up less space, need less, to exist in a way that inconveniences no one. And there's a strange comfort in it. Invisibility is, in its own way, a kind of control. If you're not fully seen, you can't be fully misread. But somewhere beneath the habit, beneath the years of practiced smallness, there's still a person who rehearses conversations, imagines being noticed, and waits quietly to be found. You've spent a long time inside your own head, longer than most people would guess if they looked at you from the outside, composed, manageable, fine. But you know what runs beneath that? The rehearsals, the observations, the translations, the versions of yourself that never made it out. And here's what none of that means. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're behind. It doesn't mean the inner life you've built so carefully is somehow less valid than the one the world can see. It means you're someone who processes deeply, who feels before speaking, who watches before moving, who carries more than they show, not out of weakness, but out of a kind of precision. The mind that rehearses conversations is a mind that cares about words. The one that imagines being seen is one that still believes connection is possible. The one that revisits old moments is one that hasn't given up on understanding. These aren't flaws running quietly in the background. They're the texture of a particular kind of inner life, one that moves slowly, carefully, and with more depth than most surfaces reveal. You are not invisible because you don't matter. You are invisible because you learned, somewhere along the way, that existing quietly was safer than existing fully. And that's something worth sitting with, not to fix, not to solve, just to see clearly, without judgment, the way you've learned to move through the world. Because the first person who needs to notice you has always been the one already listening to everything you never said.